It's time, or is it time, to talk some college football? What are the storylines to watch, and which team is most likely to disappoint? 877-881-1053.
I guess the most compelling storyline definitely for me is UT, and that's not typical. But I want to
first place vote.
I want to know what their by Nick Saban probably. I want to know what their quarterback situation is going to be, because Card definitely is a viable option, but Ewers is not there for nothing.
Sure.
And if everybody's like, hey, you idiots don't know what you're talking about, Arch Manning's not going to start for 2 years. Yeah. So Ewers isn't going to start this year? Yeah. Like, that's what's going to happen. So
it's all going to work.
I think UT is a very compelling story. And will they take a step up when they actually do go into the SEC? Now, I don't know if that bears anything this year, but whenever because A&M definitely did, like, the competitiveness level of what you guys had. Sure. For sure, whenever the SEC was in place, it was like, oh, I can play in the SEC. So I think UT definitely does offer some very interesting storylines this year.
As much as I hate to say part of this and love to say the other part of it, I really do think two of the teams most likely to disappoint are Texas and Texas A&M.
Because the hype level for A&M's too high?
Yeah, I mean, look, Texas A&M, they're ranked 7th in the country. They just had the greatest recruiting class in the history of football recruiting. And the
head coach just did a hit 'em up parody during media. Actually, it wasn't even during media days. It was when he called his own press conference to address Nick Saban. And then at media days tried to play it down like he didn't say what we heard him say.
Yeah. And so, that's concerning to me. And then your third game, and, maybe your first real game, is you host a top 20 team in Miami. And then you're looking at, whether it's Ole Miss or Mississippi State. Some people think that I think it's Ole Miss that some people think could be a problem. And then guess what? You have a road game against Alabama. You host Florida. That schedule is freaking brutal. And I love Texas A&M. But you can count on Texas A&M to lose a game on you when the hype is there. I still think about the 2012 season where I firmly believe Texas A&M was the best team in the country. But that was only after they lost 2 really early games, and there was no more pressure on them because you're like, well, you'll never be in the playoff. And then they just ran through everybody. But when the pressure is usually on, Texas A&M does not frequently rise to that level of pressure, which pains me to say. And then Texas, for the last decade or so, they have frequently been overrated and then frequently slid back into their comfortable zone of 7-5 as they are the Dallas Cowboys of college football.
So A&M kind of is in that zone that OU was always in for me, where they would get ranked really high. Number 1 a lot of times, and I'm like, why are you doing this to us?
Yeah.
We're a number 3 at best. Why are you putting this team in that category? When it comes to, listen, Alabama's always going to be in that mix.
Sure.
They're always going to be competitive for it, and you're just a little shy of what Alabama and those kinds of teams are producing. So I was always like, why are you even saying that this year's the year for them? Because they're going to run through the Big 12, obviously, so it made everything look good.
Right.
But there was always that zone of, we're maybe a number 4, and don't give us this high of a rating, because what's going to happen is they're going to lose a game at some point, and then everybody's going to be like, see, this is why they should have been number 1. That's because they did it wrong in the first place.
Yeah, no, and I'm perfectly comfortable saying we're not Alabama, we're not Georgia, and we're on the cusp of being in the top 10. I'm like, hey, that sounds pretty okay to me. Because then if you lose to Miami, it's not a catastrophe. Because that game's number 10 against number 14. You're like, oh, what could happen? But now it's going to end up being number 6 against number 17. They're going to be like, oh my God, shocking upset and blah, blah, blah. Now, Texas, unfortunately, we've seen this time and time and time again. And from the 9-7-2, Texas will beat Alabama in the regular season and win the Big 12 championship. No, they won't. They won't.
Who do you like for the Big 12 championship this year?
I'm actually kind of curious about Baylor and Oklahoma State.
Dave Aranda's Baylor is fun, man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously, I'm not just going to discount Oklahoma. I know what we were talking about, but that doesn't discount their ability to win the Big 12. But I think you look at Baylor and Oklahoma State, and I kind of wonder, where they fit into the hierarchy of this as well. But I think Texas is, look, I get the optimism for Texas. Is Quinn Ewers is one of the most outstanding quarterback prospects we've seen in this generation. And then next year, Arch Manning might be even better, or at least they're equally like lauded. And so I get the anticipation for that, but you also have a head coach who's not proven to be a particularly good head coach. Like, he's an offensive guru, but he's not a good head coach.
He's definitely figured out how defenses like to play right now, and he's got the clamp on how to offensively do that. But he's got to get his defense up to par, too. What about Kansas for over 2.5? Like, would you take the over-under on that? Over 2.5, Reggie, for Kansas.
I think they could win 3 games.
They okay.
That's as far of the over that I'm willing to go.
So they open against Tennessee Tech. They have at home against Duke. And what do you think about their chances against TCU this year?
You know what? I think they've had Texas's number, honestly. Like, I don't know what the stat is, but I'd seen something as like, oh, Kansas has won 4 Division I games, and 3 of them are against Texas, or like whatever the case is. Kansas wins that weirdo game on you that you're like, how in the hell did that happen? And then a Big 12 team has to like reevaluate whether or not they want to keep football at the school because they just lost to Kansas. Mm-hmm. So I'll barely.
Is it weird that they can always get somebody to go there that's really good at basketball, but they can't get anybody to go there that's good at football?
Yes. You know what's weird about that as well? What are we, like 15, 20 years removed from there was a time when Kansas was number 1 in the country in a BCS bowl game?
Yeah.
That might be
the
most
Mangino years?
Yes.
Oh, Mark Mangino.
Yeah.
He was great at OU.
That was the guy that was really heavy.
Yeah, he
sure was.
He was.
Yeah, he was a big man.
But they were number 1 in the country. That was the thing.
They're better than Michael Bishop. You know, at Kansas State.
Kansas State.
That's right.
Remember was he from Blinn or Navarro?
Yes. No, he was from Blinn, and everyone at A&M was like, why the hell couldn't we get him to come here? And then that was the only Big 12 championship that we ever won, was beating Kansas State.
Because of the grass. They were like, he was like, I want to walk on grass when I want to walk on grass. They were like, nope.
No, that is at the school.
Oh, okay.
By the way, did you see that they shifted the Big Ten games? Now, it won't be immediate, but ESPN said big fat thumbs down because they're like, here's the deal. We're going to give you less games, and we want more money in a couple of years. And the ESPN was like, yeah, no, we have the SEC. So big fat pass on that.
Well, I mean, they've always had portions of the SEC.
No. You're right. But now they have exclusive access, I think, starting in 2024.
I mean, the Big Ten is, going to be a lot of inventory and everything. But I'm wondering how, like, if this will affect the Big Ten. Because we've seen a lot of, like, hubbub about what this might mean, the Big Ten not being involved with ESPN as a partner. Because we all know programming on ESPN somewhat skews based on what partnerships they have.
Oh, sure.
And especially with ESPN having such a large stake in the college football playoff. Like, the good teams are still going to be the good teams, but I wonder what happens with coverage and how that affects, like, the national conversations about Big Ten teams.
Did you see what happened last night?
No.
So, last night, Big Ten decided to distribute their games to everybody else. They signed about a $1 billion deal to link up with CBS, NBC, and Fox. So they will distribute their games among those 3 networks. So to your point about viability and coverage, I realize outside of the ESPN family, but they're like, fine, we'll go to all of the other networks.
And they'll get their TV money. And good for them for getting all that TV money.
But you think they're not going to have a say in the room?
But we all know, like, as much as Fox Sports has been out here trying to contend, like, there isn't a contention with the big 4 letters when it comes to, like, shaping narratives on the sports landscape. So I'm really intrigued to see how that affects the Big Ten and, like, what their teams do. And maybe not Ohio State, who's probably always going to be in the conversation, but, the teams that end up being in the teens and the 20 ranges of those rankings. Like, how does their appeal change based on, like, the tastemakers of ESPN not having incentive to talk about them?
The opening day of college football, Kevin, I don't know if, like, do you know what the slate is for this day? I have some really good games to read off for you.
Is it opening days or the second week? Because I know they have like a soft open before Labor Day with a bunch of
Yeah,
kinda-
probably not the soft open.
That one's junk.
Check this out. Cincinnati at Arkansas.
Okay.
Seems like two teams on the rise there. Oregon and Georgia at Atlanta.
Ooh.
Utah at Florida. Which
Dude, the hype on Utah is pretty high.
Notre Dame at Ohio State.
Holy moly.
Florida State versus LSU in New Orleans. That's on a Sunday. And then that's Brian Kelly's first game with the Tigers. So close to home. And then Clemson versus Georgia Tech, Atlanta. That's in Atlanta on Monday. So, like, that's a really good slate
That's
of opening.
Labor Day then,
Yeah.
right? And then the week after that, Texas plays Alabama.
Yeah.
So, like, the beginning of the schedule after the soft
packed it the
opening
right way, man.
is pretty stacked. And by the way, just somebody's like, I think you're thinking of Kansas State, not Kansas. No, I swear. Kansas was in the Orange Bowl, and there was a minute where I think it was the Orange Bowl, and there was a minute where they were ranked number 1 in either the BCS or
2008.
in the polls. That was 14 years ago. That
They were
was
11-1.
It happened. It happened.
They were 11-1, and that was Frank Beamer versus Mike Mangino. And was that Michael Vick? No.
No. Michael Vick would have been out.
Trying to figure out who the quarterback. It was Tyrod Taylor. So that's an interesting group there, man.